Patricia, thank you so much for taking time to come and talk to us today. I wonder if, to kick things off, you could help, in your own words, describe what inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning is for people that may not have experienced it in their lives thus far.
It's a relatively simple mechanism that is used in a number of countries. And to a certain extent, the terminology alters depending upon what country you're talking about. In the UK, for example, it's often referred to as Section 106 housing. And there you're looking at when a developer gets permission to go ahead with a development, they will be in communication, collaboration and agreement with the local council to deliver a certain proportion of those houses as affordable. And by deliver, it might be directly to the local council, it might be to a third sector provider, like a community housing organisation, or they might put them onto the market, but to sell to a list of eligible households at particular prices.
And would that be driven by affordability predominantly? Is that the issue that's being addressed?
In one sense, affordability, and in the other, it depends. It honestly depends on your local context. So in the UK, which is where I was going to start, just because it gets very different for different local contexts, their town and country planning legislation has to balance social, economic and environmental, which is often referred to as nature, the last one. But those three are the balance. Whereas, just to give you the contrast, New Zealand planning legislation doesn't mention social, really. And it's more about property rights in New Zealand and externalities of your property rights, which can then be seen as environmental. So they may be trying to achieve some sort of community mix. That may be the driver for delivering it in that particular context. Or they may be trying to address a particular need. So it might be what the Americans would call key worker housing, which is a bit different from just affordability. Just to go back to England, because it's easiest to start in one place, that affordability may go across a range of different affordability brackets. So it might literally be social housing for very low income people, right through to people who are marginal buyers, purchasers.
Okay. Now, I'll come back to it later because I'm aware you have significant history here with inclusionary and in Queenstown relevant knowledge and experience. But I'd like to go back to why, at a high level, why, given your international experience and your local New Zealand experience, is it so difficult, you think, to get inclusionary housing over the line in a New Zealand context?
There's two separate reasons, I think. One of them is simply the difference in legislation, just to take the English versus the New Zealand example. The second, and there we have, our Resource Management Act is really not relevant for social community planning. It's not part of the legislation, whereas it is in England. The second reason is how we address property rights. So that when you are a owner of a piece of property in the UK, you could be a developer with a greenfield site, you could be a homeowner. You own what's on the land. That's your property. You do not own the right to develop. The right to develop belongs to, basically, we would call it the Crown, but the local council. In order to get permission to do a development, you have to go into negotiation with the local council to acquire that development right for however many, 25 houses or what have you. And it's during those negotiations the local council can say, and we want to get some affordable housing into the mix.
That would be quite a shock for New Zealanders who have quite a different concept of property.
In New Zealand, we have property ownership, your house, your piece of land, or what have you, and we have zoning. As soon as the district plan tells you what the new zoning for your property is when it's been updated, you are given that passed over without any asking for money back. You basically get given that development right. And it comes at the zoning stage, not at the getting your final resource consent stage. It's a fundamental difference. But in the US, which has zoning, It's a very similar situation to us, except that, of course, it's all done by states and local jurisdictions, and it's a very complicated country. But to give one tiny example, the whole of California, zoning, but without ending up in the courts, which is, of course, what everyone's trying to avoid because it's costly and it slows things down, but without ending up in the courts, any municipality, so any city council, district council, or that's what we call them, in California, the council can ask the developer to provide 15% affordable housing. And they can go up to that 15% without any legal pushback. If they want more because they think there's an enormous need for affordable housing, that's when the developers may say, hold on, and you end up in the courts. So it's a different situation, right? Other countries have zoning, but quite often they put in a layer of 15% as an example.
In those examples that you're using there, is it a land or improvements, homes, or is it a money, or is it a mixture? How is the consideration transferred?
Oh, in America?
Yes.
It could be anything you can negotiate.
Okay.
Right. And in fact, there is what's called a secondary market in America for the provision of affordable housing by developers who specialize in that meets the obligation of the private market developer. So
presumably within a specific jurisdiction or a geographical area.
Yeah, but the trouble with that approach is, let's assume you've got a reasonably large city, right, in California or area of land. The developer might do the private property development in part A of the city. The affordable housing bit, which they are required to deliver, could be way over the other side of the area. And it's potentially likely to be on land that's not so desirable. Because where would you put your affordable housing, right?
Okay, yes.
So there is that difference. And one of the things that we made really clear when we did the Queenstown work was it should be integrated. Because we actually didn't want affordable housing in some horrible bit of Queenstown versus everyone else living in a very nice part of Queenstown. Queenstown Lakes, I should say,
yes,
right
I understand.
through that,
Yeah,
it's including Wanaka and Glenorchy and Arrowtown and the caboodles. Everyone goes Queenstown, right?
I'm aware that you have had a lot to do with a number of substantial sort of aspects of the New Zealand housing system, including the New Zealand Housing Strategy 2005. But I'd like to ask you, in the context of what we've just talked about in the UK, the USA, and here in the New Zealand context, about housing needs assessments, and because obviously in an ideal scenario with a mixed and inclusive outcome being the desired outcome, understanding the persistent unmet housing need is a fundamentally important driver for what the supply side solution should be that would best match that unmet need. Can you walk us through, please, a housing needs assessment process and why it matters?
Well, for sure it really matters, because what you're asking, if you think about it as bringing something innovative and new into the mix, you're asking a developer to agree to negotiate and collaborate to deliver something, and inevitably they will see that use of the land and the site as potentially a huge drag on their profit margins. So if you're trying to balance that on one side, then I think that you've got a really strong need to, the council in particular, has to show why it's really needed to deliver a housing needs assessment. As you know, the Labour government of the day in 2007, was it? Produced a Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act, which only lasted for 12 months. And then the next incoming, led by John Key government, got rid of it. But along with that piece of legislation, which was about enabling local councils to not have to end up in the Environment Court, not have to get into big discussions with developers, but actually be in a position where they could go and talk with developers about what they could contribute to the local economy by way of, and communities by way of affordable housing. I put together a draft needs assessment for what was then, well, basically for the minister. And that basically is it's quite simple. It's how many people are in housing need, how many people in the future will be in housing need. So if you're in an area with a growing economic development, you're going to get more people coming and living there. What price brackets are you looking at? What types of households? So it could be that, I don't know, it's all elderly people who've been working there all their lives and want to retire there that need housing, or it might be it's young workers coming in. A bit of a needs assessment on cultural issues. So it could be housing for single people through to extended family living. Matching that against what's available in the district as a whole at different price points. And comparing those two basically tells you, what the problem is going to be.
Yes.
Because this is all about what can be done, right? It's not
well that's right. That's the
moment.
conversation we're having, and it's a conversation about what's possible. Our interest from a community housing perspective is around having a more responsive housing system and adequately housing all our people.
Yeah.
And so naturally our focus is on low and moderate income households, which, if we're honest, the current market-driven housing system in New Zealand is not delivering particularly well for. And within that, there are cohorts of older adults and youth and other groups of people who are being very poorly served, particularly by the private rental market.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we did the needs assessment, it was done for local councils, and it was done using readily available Department of Statistics census type data and a bit of, if I remember rightly, QV type data, so easily accessible. And it was very much a step by step, because many local councils are very interested, but they don't have the staff, the skills, the capacity to go off and do a hugely sophisticated needs assessment. It's not in their remit, right?
Yeah, brilliant. And the thing I like about what you're describing there is it's achievable, it's specific. You've laid out a way of doing it. Local government has a really important role to play here, because ultimately they are issuing consents, right? And that's the pointy end of inclusionary housing is at that consent moment in time.
I was just going to say it's worthwhile just explaining a little bit about the Queenstown Lakes experience, just because I know it's like, still the model, if you like, of what potentially could happen.
Yes.
It's, as you know, it's relatively isolated. When I work with a consultancy called Hill Young Cooper, which is someone called David Mead, so you'll find David Mead's been doing work since with other local councils. But what's clear when you have a community that's relatively isolated, apart from anything else, is people would go there when they're quite young. They would work there for 5, 6, 7 years. They would say, I want to stay here, raise my kids, contribute to the local community, and they couldn't afford to buy a house. And part of that is it's a service sector economy, making beds, cooking meals for the most part, working on ski fields, whatever. But the other issue was even the local workers who might want to, build a house, they live in Cromwell. And so every morning there'll be the white vans driving in from Cromwell, which is an hour and some odd down the road, which in the winter, if you're trying to run a ski field, for example, is useless because, you can't do it. So it is an isolated community. But the point about Queenstown, and I think this is the bit, apart from the fact we work with all the community groups we could find and the developers and the council and we did God knows how many workshops. The most critical part of that was we actually didn't start with inclusionary. We started with linkage zoning.
What does that mean? What's linkage zoning?
So linkage zoning is we know is economic development happening here.
Yes.
And at the time, the economic development consisted of opening up of a new ski field. It consisted of some quite large housing developments, and that's jobs, people are building them, and also some quite large, what I would call service jobs that were starting to appear. So major expansion of a supermarket, just the construction plus the running of it, and the airport, which of course belongs to the council. So that was just the starters. And if you think about it, all the people who are going to be working in those economic activities have to live somewhere.
Yes.
And they are either going to be pushing out people because they can perhaps get better paid jobs in competing on the local rental market or first homeowner market. Or it's just too much of a squeeze, basically, unless you can start getting affordable housing somehow into the mix.
Yes.
And so the first approach, which the local council was highly supportive of, as was the businesses, was actually more of a linkage zoning. And for that, we drew on experience overseas. Yes. And we looked at some pretty straightforward formula, which were on if it's this sort of worker. And we actually even did things like a formula where if there's two of you in a household, you only need one house, you don't need two, and
yep.
stuff like that. But basically worked out how many additional houses would be needed, what price bracket would the market deliver, or was there a role for the council to step in? And that was the first go that built on what they were already trying to do in Queenstown, which was a voluntary contribution, which was an inclusionary zoning, one from a developer who was developing an area called Jack's Point.
Yes.
And if I remember rightly, they were offering 5%.
Yes, that rings a bell.
Affordable, yeah. And so they were doing inclusionary zoning in that sense, and we said, well, what about linkage zoning? Put the two together and looked for the best argument that could be substantiated under the Resource Management Act.
Yes.
Ran it through with the council's RMA lawyer, and they they took that off through the first stages of the knowing it was going to land in the Environment Court because it was inevitable.
Yes.
And that gradually came out the far end as an inclusionary zoning thing. Yeah.
Which has delivered substantial outcomes, positive outcomes, and decent volumes of affordable housing in the Queenstown Lakes District.
You probably know the numbers better than me, but they have done an amazing job, not only in terms of total delivery of houses, but across the spectrum of different types of tenure.
Well, that's right. And the way that Julie describes it, she's the CE of the trust down there, is that there's now quite widespread acceptance of it across the community because there are very few people now in the Queenstown Lakes District who don't know somebody who's still living in Queenstown Lakes because they can afford to, because of one of the homes that they have delivered.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Well, it is, but it's still being...
They need more.
Opposed. It's still being opposed quite vigorously and through litigation and other measures, it is being systematically undermined. What do you think the big blockages or barriers are to not only encouraging it and delivering it more in the Queenstown Lakes area, but across the whole of New Zealand?
When we did the sort of preparatory work for it, we were interviewing a lot of people, including developers, and we met this incredibly nice developer. We met lots of very nice developers, but one particular one always stands out to me. And he was literally a developer stroke builder, yeah. And he said his guys could not afford to buy in Queenstown. So he got a piece of land which he thought was less marketable, I guess, And he'd said to them, I'll subsidise you in 2 sections, and you can put affordable houses for your family to live on. And he thought that was the solution, right?
It's not uncommon globally, is it? I mean, you think of Bourneville in the UK.
Yeah, but his solution was much delightfully accepted by his workers who built the houses on these subsidised by this very nice man developer, and then they sold them. They flipped them. So probably the strongest message out of all of that is actually without the equivalent of Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, or without some strong mechanisms to retain at some level of affordability, you might as well not bother.
Okay, because
there's my feeling.
There's one cycle, and then they're gone into the market and the affordable. Okay, so what are the mechanisms that you are aware of that do work to retain and recycle either the capital or the affordability of homes?
The one to avoid is the limited time period.
Okay.
So, for example, in Auckland, we had the special housing accords. I can't remember what it was. It was something like 5 years. Keep them affordable. 5 years is... It was already 10 years, 20 years ago now, 10 years ago.
Blink of
an
eye.
It's gone. And then whoever was lucky enough to get an affordable house is now able to make a nice profit margin on it. We all know that because the most obvious example, and this was one of the first American states that did inclusionary zoning in a big way was Maryland, which is the area around Washington, D.C., because every 4 years there's a huge changeover of families coming in and out of the housing there as the government, gets changed. And what they did was, I think the maximum they actually put in there was 20 years. Mm-hmm. But that was 40 years ago. So that's all gone. So time limits are not the solution unless you go in perpetuity. Or you have a scheme whereby if someone really, really, really wants to buy the house, then the money should go back in, for the sale has to go back into something, community housing provider, for example, to buy another house.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that particular house stays affordable.
Yes, I do, but then at least there's a continuous replacement program running there.
There has to be some organisation, and it either is the local council, and the trouble with it being the local council is it's a bit subject to political cycles.
Yes.
Community housing providers tend to be very good. I'm really interested in community land trusts as a mechanism for retaining affordability, because when that happens, you're only buying the house, you're not buying the land. That does mean if you're a household, you buy the house, which gives you all the rights, to
Yes.
do what you want with your own house. You can paint it, you can, etc. You have to maintain it. But there's normally a leasehold system that operates between you and the land. Mm-hmm. And if the land is in some sort of community ownership, then that can quite often offer a really strong retention mechanism. And there's masses of experience on community land trusts now.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So
it's not a difficult mechanism, and it also has similarities a bit with Papakāinga,
and it's
which
got
is
a
useful.
pretty good track record in New Zealand and in the Queenstown Lakes district.
They have a secure housing, I think they call their tenure.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
it's in all intents and purposes, it functions like a community land trust, although it's a slightly different mechanism. But
Who owns the land under that one?
the community housing trust
Right,
itself
okay.
does.
Yeah.
And what they do is they issue, each time a home is recycled again, because if a family needs to leave the region or move on, they must sell the improvements, the house, back to the trust.
Yeah.
They do that on a number of years times CPI adjustment. So there is actually an improvement in the capital value from the household's perspective. And they do a renewable 99-year lease every time a household
keeps
starts.
on going
it starts
round
again.
and round and round.
That's
The
right.
place to look at actually is America, believe it or not. Community land trusts are not only common in America, but they are federally funded.
Ah, interesting.
And the federal funding does come with requirements, which some local communities are happy and comfortable with, and some of them find it more difficult to operate under. So not all community land trusts in America are like that.
Yes.
And in fact, I think most of the ones in Vermont, where you've got lots of them, are a little bit wary of that. But if you want to go for federal funding, sure. There are systems, and interestingly enough, actually, just thinking about it, that separation of the land from the house is starting to appear mainly because of Papakāinga type developments here. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei have got mortgages from BNZ for the dwellings, but not on the land
Yes.
for their new houses.
Yes. So
And
when
if you want
mainstream
to-
banks are doing things, that helps enormously, doesn't it,
Yeah,
to oil
yeah, yeah.
the machinery?
Yeah, well, it becomes more normal, which is what you're after, isn't it? So if you want affordable housing through inclusionary zoning to become more normal,
Yes, we do.
and you want some retention mechanism, and it's definitely a retention mechanism. It's not the only one there. I think probably the bit that is worthwhile realising as well, and it's to do with New Zealand's planning legislation, is voluntary inclusionary zoning under the current RMA is pointless.
Because
Because, okay, so let's say you use some sort of incentive mechanism and you say, right, you're building an apartment block, quite common now in Auckland, 6 stories high. We will let you build, and of course we've just thrown most of this out the window with the latest round of government initiatives, but we will let you build, rather than 6 stories high, you can go up to 10 stories high as long as you provide so much affordable housing as part of that development. What that does is it shifts what's called the permitted baseline. Go into RMA technicality, but the person who owns the piece of land next to them, this site that's now got a 10-story block on it, even though it's only zoned for 6 stories, looks at the 10-story and said they were allowed to go up to 10, I'm allowed to go up to 10. And the courts have agreed with the developer. That's the permitted baseline now. So we have to seriously look at the RMA if we want to use incentives like that, like greater height, greater floor area coverage, in order to encourage or incentivize developers to deliver it. The only way I think we'll really get it is if we make it so that, for example, like in California, you can just ask for it up to a certain amount.
Yeah. We're coming at this from a community housing perspective with an unabashed interest in seeing inclusionary housing much more broadly applied in the New Zealand housing system because, well, there's a number of reasons. Number one, at the moment, we're in a very tight fiscal environment, and that land or cash that might come from inclusionary arrangements behaves as equity and unlocks continuous new supply of affordable housing. Can I hear your thoughts and views, because there's quite a lot of legislative change in the pipeline at the moment, which leaves things uncertain. But one of the things that people have expressed as a concern, particularly in Queenstown, is that they were standing alone as the local authority. Have you got a view on central legislation and central government enablement of inclusionary in the New Zealand context?
Well, having more or less written 3/4 of an act on that, yes, but that wasn't a requirement. It was affordable housing enabling territorial local authorities, and it basically said any local authority, territorial authority that wanted to, had to deliver a needs assessment to show that there really was a need for it, but then they could. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to really, and this is the one that's going to be so difficult, I think, in New Zealand, is bring social into the Resource Management Act. That might be too big an ask. The third way could be go the Californian route, which is you set, yes, you can up to a certain amount. And you have to discuss that with the country as a whole. But if they say 10%, and then after that, California, it's 15, what the hell? You then work towards that as a accepted norm. I think that's an option.
Yes.
Don't know. The other side of it is actually, and it strikes me that maybe people probably aren't quite aware how this happens, but just to go back to Section 106. You own the land, you're the developer, right? You've got this grand plan to put something on it, 23 houses, whatever it is. You know you're going to have to get your planning permission. You go and get all your quantity work done. It's going to cost me this amount of money to basically build, right? The councils in the UK are required to deliver, a little bit like here, you must zone. In the UK, well, at least in England, they're not actually required to zone because they don't zone. They are required to deliver a certain number of completed houses, which is much more arduous than just zoning. Anyone can zone, but actually working with local developers, not only to get the land already, but to put a certain number of houses on it.
So local government are commissioning new housing supply?
They're not commissioning, but they are required to, and there will be a penalty imposed by central government, by Westminster, if they show, it's a cycle, right, if they don't deliver.
Yep.
So that's part of it. But the point is that you go to local council, you're the developer, you show them all your plans, this is what council says, yes, I would really like this many houses built on that site. Right, this is your number, right? They use what's called a residual value. Oh. This is getting us into the quantitative side of it. But basically, they look at what the developer can do in terms of the current maths, right? They say, this is how much your land is, this is all the things you have to do to deliver the houses, this is going to cost this much. Then they add to it what they consider to be, in negotiation with the developer, consider to be a reasonable profit margin.
Yes.
Yep. Anything left over, that's how much they grab for affordable housing.
Okay.
It's called the residual value approach.
There's a good logic to it, though. I mean, it's transparent and it's accountable, and you can see clearly.
And you are capturing some of that value, because the reason they can even do the development is because that property development right, their community, the public as a whole, has transferred to them to enable them to do it.
Yep. sounds good to me. Is it working well?
In the UK,
Yes.
it's how they get most of their affordable housing.
Right.
Because the councils are no longer, policy cycles, right? But yeah, no, it's been absolutely significant in terms of delivering affordable housing in the UK, and especially at one point, councils were the big builders. And I think that was actually from the 1950s onward as they rebuilt after the Second World War, you know? So somewhere like Birmingham City Council, huge property owner, lots and lots of houses. But as I guess the private sector developers became more and more significant, they've moved more and more into using Section 106, even in somewhere like Birmingham.
Yes. Yeah. And
London, it's huge. I mean, I don't know what the current, each borough will have a different requirement, but you might have met people from London boroughs who have been negotiating 40% requirements affordable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very significant numbers. Yeah. I mean, our main concern in the New Zealand context is the lack of continuous additional affordable housing supply. To someone, and there's quite a few that we bump into in any given day here and in other regions of New Zealand, who has swallowed the neoliberal pill and thinks the market will deliver affordable housing for low and moderate income households. Have you any thoughts on that? Any observations from?
If you want a market that's a bit similar to us, Nicole Gurran, who's Professor of Planning at University of Sydney, led a research team that looked at, I was going to say, just let us put houses anywhere in New South Wales, basically.
Yes.
And what was the impact on the delivery of affordable housing? And the answer is minute amount.
Right.
And the trouble, I think, in terms of your skeptics, is I've invited Nicole over several times. We've done Zoom meetings with policy people down in Wellington. She explained the research project that one of these big research projects that she led in University of Sydney. And actually, it was over in one of the Auckland Council offices, and everyone was saying, "Oh, yes, this is really interesting." The person who was listening down in Wellington from Treasury didn't like what they were hearing and got up and left the room.
Okay, we have a problem then, don't we?
We have a big problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Trish, with your knowledge and your experience and your view of the New Zealand housing system, if I were to give you a magic housing policy wand and ask you to think creatively with no limitations, what are some of the big things that you would lean into and write as policy adjustments within the housing system?
I think it would depend. New Zealand is very context specific, right? So the housing solution for somewhere like Auckland is very different from the housing situation and solution for Timaru or,
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
Timaru wasn't big. I mean, it could have been anywhere. Sure. It could have been Hawke's Bay or what have you.
But the Ministry of Housing's moving to what they call a place-based approach. So at least they're tipping their hats now in the ministry to those variations you're describing.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with, to slightly turn your question round, and of course that was a major intervention, putting all of their reliance on Kāinga Ora to use the sites that they owned. For example, a big chunk of Kāinga Ora's work has been until recently in Auckland.
Yes.
They've used the fact that Kāinga Ora had land, right? So you take off the old 3-bedroom state house, suddenly you've got a reasonably large site and you can put new housing on it. And then, as I'm sure you know, that housing could sometimes be social housing, could sometimes be first purchase housing, could just be market housing. And I actually think that when they started to do that, and that 3-for-1 model is quite common, as you know, they should probably have got community housing providers much more extensively involved in that space. Why not? It's daft not to. But also, they did not significantly consider the communities they were disrupting. So they've done major programs in Auckland and shifted populations, many of whom are quite vulnerable, from one part of Auckland to another part of Auckland, and you can say, yes, they still live in Auckland, but travel times in Auckland to get back to work, disruption for kids not being able to go to their school, breaking barriers with the local churches for many families. It's just been incredibly disruptive. And in a weird way, it's even more so now because we have a large number of sites that have been cleared by Kāinga Ora that are sitting there.
Yes.
And because the private sector isn't going to start developing because there isn't enough money to be made on them. And I would imagine, well, Kāinga Ora can't because of the current situation. So my little magic wand for Auckland would be to seriously look at these cleared sites and actually go and start talking to community housing providers about putting some housing onto them for local communities that have been so disrupted by what they've been doing.
Yeah, and we would presumably start with, if there wasn't one already, a housing needs assessment, although it's hard when people have been displaced.
Yeah.
Because how do we capture that?
Yeah, we've done a huge amount of displacement. I mean, I know families that have been picked up and, we all do, but, Manarewa, wouldn't you like to move your family to Manarewa? But all my contacts, my jobs, my school, my church, my doctors are actually on the isthmus.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a long way to go. But I mean, some of these connections are still there. I mean, there are families now. Do you really want to know what's happening?
Yes.
Okay. There are families now, particularly in the Pacific community, because for them, family and church is everything. So family's been offered a 2-story townhousey thing or apartment or something, house, in Manarewa. Nice, well-designed, a bit cramped on site, nowhere for the kids to play, but it is a house and it is with Kāinga Ora, so it's a long-term, you're not going to get thrown out by a private sector landlord tenancy. So mum and dad moved there. All of the kids are now living with granny in the original suburb.
Because of the
connections. They can go to local school, can. So we've now got Monday to Friday commutes.
Goodness.
So the parents now come up on Friday night, leave the kids there, drive back down on Monday.
Not ideal, is it?
That is within Auckland. I mean, I have no idea how they're coping with it anywhere else.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we had the big floods in January 2 years ago. One of the areas that got really badly hit by that was Wesley, which is sort of near Mount Roskill. And it's actually got a lot of Housing New Zealand Kāinga Ora housing. There's a big stream that sort of comes out of Oakley Creek. You're looking at the sort of central area of Auckland, but on the west side. And all of those people that were living in both new and old Kāinga Ora houses were flooded out. And of course, Kāinga Ora has only got a certain amount of housing vacant at any one time, so they were offered places in Howick or somewhere over there.
Yes. Yeah, big change.
Yeah,
big life
and so
change.
I think the problem with that is, in a very general sense, is housing is more than the actual house.
Yes.
Housing is the local community context. It's where granny lives. It's, all that stuff. It is not just a house. Yeah. That is a bit we haven't quite managed to get ourselves to understand. And that's particularly true for more vulnerable families who are only just managing to survive economically.
With what you've seen, what you've heard, with the research you've done, is it worth us giving this a go in the New Zealand context? Are there other levers that would have a similar positive impact to inclusionary? Or I'm just interested, are you bold? Are you thinking it's worth us having a crack at this? Or
I will give it a go. And the reason I would do it is a little bit like we did linkage zoning to start off with in Queenstown, where we were trying to match up the needs of the employers, which is very much about trying to retain skilled workforces, even though they didn't really pay them a huge amount, and so it was about economic development. And so the council could understand that much easier than we'll just go for a mixed income community.
Yeah.
Not that I'm ever going to be this, but if I was a local policymaker or a politician, I would be really interested in ways to kickstart the construction industry. And it's quite clear if you talk to the private sector construction people in Auckland, they won't. They're not going to do much more. There's not enough money in it. Look at Auckland developments. They're just sitting on sites now, even though they've got everything ready to go. Yeah. But if you could say we've got community housing providers who can access some other funding as well. We've got sites which Kāinga Ora isn't currently going to be doing any development on. And we've got a skilled workforce that we could actually make use of, pay, have money circulating around the local economy. I think if you presented the potential to kickstart the beginnings of this off as an economic development opportunity, and then said, and by the way, this could have been going on for a long time, and councils are interested. Auckland Council's interested. Wellington was trying to do it. Christchurch was trying to do it. The big councils understand it reasonably well.
I really like that. That's a really nice way of reframing the offering and putting that on a table where there's a shared interest from different motivations. But
absolutely. I don't care what the motivation is. If you end up with good quality housing in existing communities that community housing providers, as an example, can retain and actually bring some of the community people who've got displaced back into it, it's actually a win-win for everyone.
Brilliant. We're in a very tight fiscal environment. The government has effectively removed its balance sheet from the table and it's not really committing to large-scale additional affordable housing supply. And so when we look at the available options within the New Zealand housing system, inclusionary housing is one of the only ones we really think might move the dial significantly on affordable housing supply. What do you think? Are there other options we're missing that we should be looking at?
I think there's two different things in there. One is, I think we have to be very careful that it doesn't sort of be seen as a burden on the developers. They're having enough difficulties as it is keeping going in the Auckland context as an example. But there's clearly been rather large speculative increases in land value, which is really what we're trying to capture in here, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But I think as well, alongside the affordable housing, if we could get some affordable housing contributions out of new development or alongside new development, in a way, the developer then can market to a wider audience. And if they could get community housing providers a guaranteed number of sales, we will buy from you at this subsidised rate 10% of your stock.
Gives you some certainty, doesn't it?
It gives the developers certainty, because that's for sure what they need. So they can, they might not make a larger profit. There's that. But there's also what can you get from other places. And the experience from the USA is sometimes the council can throw in a little bit. Sometimes the council's got a site that they're not going to use for anything else. Can they contribute some of that, maybe at a subsidised rate?
Yes.
That you can add to the inclusionary zoning. We can't do some of the many things in the New Zealand context that they do in the USA in particular, I don't think, because they do things like increase sales taxes. Well, that's GST. Auckland Council might wish to increase GST, but it's not going to go ahead. It's bad enough trying to increase anything else. So there's the mechanisms, but the point about all those sorts of mechanisms is, and there's a number of them, is we can't do the incentives, we can't do the increased height, it just doesn't work under the RMA. We can't increase local sales taxes, it's not an option. If central government can throw a little bit into the pot, if the developers can throw a little bit into the pot, if the local councils can throw a little bit into the pot, it might work.
Yes.
And it's one way. I don't think we should say affordable housing through inclusionary zoning is the one and only way to go. It's what else can you throw into it?
Yep.
And if you can make that argument that, for example, it will get the construction sector going, go for it.
Especially bottoming out as we are after 2 years of very steep and heavy decline.
Before they all leave,
Yes.
Lucky old Australia.
Yeah.
But so I think, yes, try for it, but I don't think it's a magic bullet. I think it's part of the package.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really nice to hear you advocating for te kotahitanga working together, because that's a theme across the whole sector is really a little bit here, a little bit there. It adds up to quite a lot in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting your comment about basically the government's pulled out its balance sheet. Many moons ago, Auckland Council had some land available. They took $1 million of their money, They set it up as, I think, a bond system. So they were able to generate $10 million on the basis of certainty of it being the local council $1 million. And they went with a private developer to start putting affordable housing on a site. So councils can do things. That particular one fell over because there was local body elections, but exactly the wrong moment. But there is potential in there. I'm not saying we should try doing that. I'm just saying if everyone can contribute a bit, you might get somewhere.
Lovely. Thank you for leaving us with a message of hope.
Oh, okay. You're welcome.
Really appreciate your time, Trish, and your knowledge and experience and sharing that with us. So thank you.
You are more than welcome. Thank you.